All right. Good morning, everybody. And I did see that Storytelling in Scratch is the last on the list of the best-selling camps. So I just wanted to promote it a little bit before I even explain how awesome it is because of the things that I've added and adjusted. It is one of the few camps where the cost of the materials is literally next to nothing, right? You can invest in headphones if you want to do that so that, as different kiddos are working on Scratch, they're not making the different sound effects, which are very annoying very quickly. But other than that, Scratch is free. You already have the computers. So if you're looking for a low cost camp, that's one camp that I think may be overlooked, but maybe I'm just personally attached because I made it. All right, so diving right into it. Next slide. Our camp goals for the Storytelling Scratch is, of course, all the things on the slide that you already see. I'm not going to read each point to you, but I would say that the most important thing that we want to drive home in this version is that we're really emphasizing the storytelling, collaboration, iteration. We're kind of pushing that, feedback loop and getting help and assistance from other ninjas working on the same project, but in different variations, and then going back to their own projects and improving it. So that's kind of a new theme that we're really emphasizing this time around. And I hope they'll like it. On day one, they're going to be creating an About Me project and Joke Jam. And so those are two activities that are similar with the first, with the camp from before, but we've also created some planning documents, which I'll go over later when we talk about the Ninja Guides. But they are also given some slides where they're introduced to Scratch. But I've also made comments in the slide deck that if the kids are already familiar with Scratch, you can skip those slides and the activities will still take just as long. If not, they can add other features to their projects. So that's an option that you could take if you have kids that are experienced with Scratch. Next slide. With day two, they're going to learn about backdrops and loops, and they're also going to be creating their own sprites, and they're going to be experimenting with using a story cube to generate ideas. So this is where there is a little bit of the crafting and the cut and gluing, and they'll kind of do a little bit of what the writing process is, just taking what sticks, using different people's story cubes, maybe mixing up their own and coming up with a story out of the ideas they generate on their story cube. Next slide. On day three, they make a Mad Lib kind of activity. It's called Word Scramble, and basically they learn all about variables. They are going to be practicing taking information from the user and putting it into the actual game. And then they also draw an original sprite and create a crazy story project, which is a little bit more open-ended and like less structured. It's literally anything crazy, beginning, middle, and end, with the character that they created when they learned to draw their own sprites. Next slide. On day four, they're going to be practicing kind of some of the extensions that Scratch offers, one of which is speech to text extension, where if you type the words, it will say the thing out loud. Similar, it sounds like Siri or Google Maps navigation, or you can record your own voice and play it that way too. And they also learn about using backdrop switches to trigger other event-based coding. So it's kind of a fun way to integrate some of the skills that they may not have or already have, but they probably haven't done it in this way before. So one activity is called the News Report Project, where they can create their own news report, very similar to, kids news or actual news. And then they can also create a pep talk project where they write out a short little pep talk and then they animate a multi-scene pep talk project. So hopefully that's super fun. Day five. On the last day, they're going to take everything they've learned from day one through day four, and they're going to be creating a choose your own adventure project. So this is where they're going to take one in the beginning scene, they're going to get two options. And then once they click one option, they go to the next thing. And then once they click that, they have another two options, and then that happens. So they will be getting some planning documents where they get to plan out their multi-path scene, and that way they can kind of plot out how their story is going to go ahead of time. All right. And so on the very, very last day, they get to talk about their favorite activities. They get to choose the activity they want to feature on their favorite project list. And then they're going to present it to their friends and families at the celebration. And we've also included some other options. So instead of a presentation style, you may choose to do a gallery walk, or you may choose to do what we call a docent gallery walk, where half the class is presenting and the other class walks around, other half of the group walks around. So these are the 9 projects that they have, and on the last day they can choose which project they want to present. Next slide. Okay, so the Sensei Guide, we actually include a lot of information. There's always information on what's the best way to use Scratch. And I know that last time during our YouTube camp unveiling, we mentioned that we included directions on creating emails. So for Scratch, what is nice is if your center creates a teacher account ahead of time, you can actually create a class in Scratch. And we have found that that's probably the easiest way to do it, the path of least resistance. Of course, those of you that have run the camp, you may have other strategies and tips, and you can feel free to do it that way. This is just a way that is a little bit simpler if you've never done it before, because once you create a class, you can actually create a link in which students can create student Scratch accounts that are kind of linked to that class, but it's very easy to set up. And so the Sensei Guide also includes directions on how to create a studio, which is where students will drop in their projects for each kind. So all the projects I just mentioned, from Joke Jam to Word Scramble, Interactive Story, they're going to have their own studios so that all the Ninjas projects can go in one studio at a time. And then it's very easily manageable to organize and everything. And we also include, sorry, one more, go back once, yes. And we also include directions on how to create a Padlet account, which is, I think we mentioned it last time as well. It's a way to share their project studio links. And also, I've also used it as a way to share resources. So next slide. So with this camp in particular, I've actually created 2 Padlets. One is meant to be just a resource Padlet. And this is what I think would have existed in the Ninja documents in the past. But because so many of the resources are just links, there are links to Scratch, there are links to the tutorials. And I think a lot of Ninja guides tend to be printed out, and links do you no good if they're printed out, because they would have to type it again. So I wanted them to be able to easily access these links, and you can also customize the URL to be words that are easy to type. So hopefully that URL can be, bookmarked or favorited, because it's a place where they can go back to constantly to look at the example projects and compare their code with the example projects to be inspired. And then there are also going to be the Studio Link Padlet, which is a template that we recommend you use to create copies of for your own centers. As you're creating all the studio links, you want a place that the Ninjas can consistently go to. And the links are always just like scratch.mit.edu and then like a string of numbers. So it's not that hard for kids to type, but it's also easier for them to just click a link. So if you want to drop those links into Padlets, that's one way that we are providing as a suggestion of sharing projects. But again, if you have other ways of sharing Scratch projects, if your Ninjas are super adept, they're typing pros and they have no problem typing a string of numbers, feel free to use your own options for that. Next slide. All right. And then so I included screenshots of the 2 examples. So the first example is the resource link. So this is the one where it's the same for every camp, for anybody who is running this, and you will not be able to edit this. There's no need to edit it. It's just the resource link for all the projects, all the links, all the tutorial links that they might need. Next slide. This is the one that you would duplicate and create a separate one for every time you run the camp, because you would ultimately want, if you run the camp multiple weeks, you want each group's camp projects to be in their individual studios. I don't think there is a limit. Grant or Bill, please step in and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a limit on how many studios you can have. Okay, cool. Yeah, unlimited power. So you can just make studio upon studio upon studio, and just to keep it organized and not have multiple camps projects mixing up with other camps. So that's where the links go. And again, like I mentioned, the Sensei Guide includes information on how to take this template and remake it and customize the link to be, to fit your center. Next slide. For the Ninja Guide, we've actually included multiple planning documents. And so, for example, there's going to be, speech bubble kinds for the joke jam one, and as you see, the branching with the arrow, choose your own adventure, and then a story writing narration with beginning, thank you, beginning, middle, and end, like storyboard planning documents. So this is kind of just so that once they've written it down and plotted it out, it's a lot easier sometimes to then code. Just for example, the joke jam, just code one sprite side of the joke and then code the other sprite side of the joke at a time so they could see the entire plan ahead of time. And same thing with the choose your own adventure. Sometimes they can lose sight of all the options that they already have. So this is a way for them to see, once they get to this first path, then they have these two options and then these two options and so on and so forth. Thank you. I feel like Wheel of Fortune. Yes, so finally, as I mentioned at the very, very beginning, the focus of this camp really is the collaboration and the iteration. And so we've included a lot of different ways for the ninjas to share their experience and their story writing with one another and coding with one another, so that they're sharing, either like ways to improve the actual story, ways to improve the Scratch project, and they're getting a lot of opportunities to view other projects, talk about their code, and kind of iterate, just like the narrative writing process does. And we do hope that this camp kind of caters to those kids that may not always want to be making a game. They want to make a unique project. They want to remake a story. They want to make a fun experience, right? Even in video games, there are certain games that have a lot more narrative than others. And so there's a lot more like, I'm invested in the story. I want to know what's happening next. So this is kind of that aspect. And we're hoping to cater and kind of feed to those kids' interests. If you have ninjas who are more into creating stories and unique experiences. So